On your right is Sony's new BRAVIA 8 Mark II QD-OLED. On your left is the critically acclaimed Sony A95L it's meant to replace. In this classic scene from the 4K Blu-ray of Pan, which had been graded to 4000 nits, the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II rendered the sun and surrounding clouds with greater brightness and clarity than the A95L, hence coming closer to matching the HDR presentation on the Sony HX3110 mastering monitor. In this white room sequence from the Matrix, the BRAVIA 8 Mark II was also able to display the white background in a slightly brighter manner than on the A95L. So let's dig into the hard numbers behind what you are seeing. After calibration to D65 white point, HDR peak brightness on the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II reached close to 1700 nits on a 10% window, and could climb up to around 2000 nits on smaller window sizes up to 5%. That said, despite using the latest Gen QD-OLED panel from Samsung Display, Sony has decided against utilizing the full potential of the hardware. Full screen brightness remained capped at 250 nits, similar to the A95L, and HDR peak brightness didn't go as high as other 2025 flagship OLEDs such as the Samsung S95F equipped with the same QD-OLED panel, not to mention the LG G5 and the Panasonic Z95B featuring the new 4-stack WOLED panel. As a result, the brightness gap between the BRAVIA 8 Mark II and those 2025 flagships is more pronounced than the difference between the BRAVIA 8 Mark II and its predecessor, the A95L. Perhaps a reflection of Sony's strategic choice to position this model as part of the 8 series rather than a true flagship 9 series. Besides HDR10 and HLG, the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II also supports Dolby Vision dynamic metadata format, though PQ-ETF tracking in the most accurate Dolby Vision dark picture mode was still slightly brighter than reference. As with most if not all Sony TVs, the BRAVIA 8 Mark II couldn't achieve absolute blacks in the most accurate Dolby Vision dark picture preset, whether from external sources or from internal apps, leading to the faintest glow visible in a pitch black room when the video fades to full screen black, which is why we still prefer to watch in HDR10 with Sony's on-point dynamic tone mapping wherever possible. But if you do have to watch in Dolby Vision, here's a quick tip. Turn off smooth gradation in the picture settings. Leaving it on can lead to odd near black artifacts, swirly, flickery patterns that creep into the image, even the top and bottom letterbox bars. Despite trailing in HDR peak brightness compared to rival flagship OLED TVs from other brands this year, the BRAVIA 8 Mark II retains many of the core strengths that have defined Sony OLEDs for years, particularly in areas that matter to video enthusiasts. SDR and HDR color accuracy was superb, even with a quick 2-point white balance calibration without needing to rely on AutoCal or the CMS. Throughout our review period, we were often struck by how closely the BRAVIA 8 Mark II's color reproduction resembled that of the Sony BVM-HX3110 mastering monitor, partly helped by QD-OLED's remarkable Rec 2020 color gamut coverage of 91% in UV terms. There's a narrative out there that the BRAVIA 8 Mark II has poorer out-of-the-box SDR color accuracy than the A95L in the most accurate professional mode, but according to our measurements, Sony continues to use a similar alternate white point designed to perceptually match their mastering monitor's factory calibration, one that's intentionally cooler than D65. Once set up correctly, Sony's motion handling arguably produces less artifacts than any other TV brand on the market, a desirable trait that carries forward to the BRAVIA 8 Mark II. Even with motion flow set to off, the TV correctly performed 4:4 pull-down to present 24 frames per second movies accurately without telesonic judder, and with a maximum screen size of 65 inches, we don't really see the need to engage motion smoothing to address the mild 24p stutter inherent in film, which is laid bare by OLED's near instantaneous pixel response time. However, if you are really sensitive to this phenomenon, especially in brighter scenes, then bumping the smoothness film setting to 1 should be sufficient to smooth out the 24p stutter without introducing significant soap opera effect or SOE, which would have detracted from the cinematic feel. With motion flow disabled, Motion resolution came in at the sample and hold baseline of 300 lines, which could be improved to 650 lines by increasing smoothness camera to max, activating black frame insertion or BFI by switching clearness from low to high, boosted motion resolution to this test pattern's maximum of 1080 lines, but came at the cost of reduced brightness and visible flicker, particularly in 50Hz content common in PAL regions like the UK, so we reverted to low pretty much immediately to disable BFI. Note that the default film mode setting of high would cause some tearing and microstutter artifacts in 50Hz content containing mixed edits, so we recommend switching to the less aggressive low setting, which is still necessary for film mode interlacing for both 3.2 and 2.2 cadences. Continuing with video processing, upscaling on the BRAVIA 8 Mark II was excellent. Sub-4K content looked impressively detailed, and even heavily compressed, low bitrate material was handled better than on most competing brands, a long-standing Sony strength. A key factor here is the QD-OLED panel's lack of white subpixels, which eliminates chrominance overshoot artifacts and removes the need for compensatory processing that can bring other side effects. Unlike on the original BRAVIA 8 OLED, the smooth gradation decontouring filter remains intact on the BRAVIA 8 Mark II, allowing the TV to smooth out in-content posterization effectively, though because the higher settings would scrub away a lot of detail and create an overfiltered effect, we wouldn't go beyond the low setting. Now, one area where the BRAVIA 8 Mark II fell slightly short of expectations was in native 10-bit gradation. Historically, Sony OLEDs have delivered superior gradients even without engaging smooth gradation. However, in side-by-side comparisons, we noticed slightly more posterization in the skies of the Martian 4K Blu-ray than on the Panasonic Z95B powered by MediaTek's Pantonic 700 chipset. That said, Sony still retains an edge over LG in this aspect. We also observed a noticeable kink coming out of black on our 55-inch BRAVIA 8 Mark II review sample, resulting in a visible break in near-black transition. This issue was present, albeit to a lesser extent, on a second retail unit we measured, and manifested itself not only on this 10-bit HDR quantization test pattern, but also in real-world HDR10 footage where fire flickers against a dark background. Unfortunately, the calibration controls provided by Sony, even with 20-point white balance unlocked through the Kalman for BRAVIA app, didn't go low enough for us to fully rectify this anomaly, which could have been caused by Sony's attempt to fix the brighter near-black EOTF tracking which had affected previous OLED TVs from the Japanese company. On a more positive note, screen uniformity on our Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II review sample was right up there as the cleanest we've witnessed from any OLED TV we've tested so far. Seasoned viewers of this YouTube channel will know that QD-OLED panels, such as the one found on the BRAVIA 8 Mark II, are generally free from bending, dirty screen effect, and most importantly color tinting thanks to the technology's top emission architecture. But on top of that, our review unit excelled in dark uniformity too, barely exhibiting any thin vertical streaks on full-field gray slides just above black, or in challenging low-light scenes like the opening title sequence in The Queen's Gambit on Netflix. For gaming, input lag in game mode measured 16 milliseconds at 60 frames per second, halving to 8 milliseconds at 120 FPS, which is not the quickest on the market, but should still be enough to satisfy all but the most demanding console gamers. Outside of game mode, the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II performs intensive video processing, so in case you need to correct any lip-sync delay on your AV receiver or soundbar, input lag at 24 FPS measured an eye-watering 340 milliseconds. Back to games. Due to the MediaTek Pantonic 1000 chipset used, only 2 out of 4 HDMI connections are HDMI 2.1 inputs supporting the full HDMI 2.1 bandwidth of 48 gigabits per second, of which one is the eARC port. The Pantonic chip also allowed the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II to support 4K 120Hz Dolby Vision gameplay from the Xbox Series X, although we still prefer to play in HDR10 due to the Dolby Vision game mode being over-brightened and less accurate. Unfortunately, as with previous Sony OLEDs, the BRAVIA 8 Mark II does not support HDRG or source-based tone mapping, even though with HDR tone mapping set to off in game mode, the TV appeared to track PQ correctly, had clipping at the panel's peak brightness. That said, some form of dynamic tone mapping seemed to remain active in the background, even with HDR tone mapping off. We noticed that highlight detail would briefly appear upon a scene change, then gradually disappear, a behavior visible both on test patterns and in real-world HDR gameplay. The effect was more noticeable on the PS5, likely due to Sony's auto HDR tone mapping handshake via EDIT. After extensive testing, our recommendation mirrors what we've advised for previous Sony OLEDs. Turn HDR tone mapping off, then adjust the max TML and max FFTML values on the console, which came in at 1650 and 1000 nits respectively on our review sample, before switching to gradation preferred to preserve bright highlight detail and minimize clipping when playing HDR games. VRR including NVIDIA G-Sync worked well to reduce frame drops and tearing artifacts, but just like on every OLED TV we've tested so far, some VRR flicker remain unavoidable in certain VRR games, particularly during more sedate scenes and on static menus. The Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II reproduced full 4K 120Hz resolution and respectable gradation as demonstrated on this gray ramp pattern from the Display HDR app. However, we couldn't obtain 444 chroma even in PC and game mode at 4K HDR 120Hz, perhaps due to the companion chip implemented alongside the Panasonic 1000 SoC within Sony's XR processor. Despite not offering a user setting to disable logo detection dimming, the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II did not exhibit any noticeable auto-dimming in HDR games containing static elements such as HUD on screen. Interestingly, Sony's logo detection auto-dimming algorithm was more aggressive in SDR mode at higher peak luminance settings. For example, after a few minutes of watching some football with peak luminance set to high, the scoreboard would trigger the logo detection auto-dimming, causing the entire picture on the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II to eventually look significantly darker than rival flagship OLEDs. Note that this is only a problem if you absolutely need to set peak luminance to high when watching sports in SDR. For instance, in a very bright room, most people probably won't notice any logo detection auto-dimming at lower peak luminance settings. The Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II suppressed reflections extremely well, but owing to the lack of a polarizer in the QD-OLED panel, the screen would turn gray particularly when hit by direct light, even though the tint was slightly different from that observed on the A95L, pointing to a newer generation of QD-OLED panel. Sound quality on the 55-inch BRAVIA 8 Mark II was very good by TV standards. There's impressive bass and dialogue clarity, with a highlight being the precise sound localization from the Acoustic Surface Audio Plus technology where sound is emitted from the OLED screen itself. Let's sum up. The BRAVIA 8 Mark II is the brightest OLED TV from Sony yet, thanks to the use of the latest generation QD-OLED panel from Samsung Display, which helps the TV reproduce bright specular highlights in high-nit HDR content in a clearer and more impactful manner than the A95L. Sony's quadrifecta of accurate colors, superb upscaling, wonderful motion, and masterful handling of low bitrate content remains unrivaled. And when you add to the equation all the picture quality attributes we've come to like so much about QD-OLED technology, such as class-leading screen uniformity, cleaner near-black handling without chrominance overshoot or flashing artifacts, wide viewing angles without off-axis tinting, as well as rich color saturation that won't be diluted by high brightness, the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II deservedly earns our highly recommended award. Of course, no TV is without compromises. For those of you seeking a more immersive viewing experience, the BRAVIA 8 Mark II does not go larger than 65 inches, and its HDR peak brightness lags behind similarly priced 2025 flagship OLEDs, held back by a software cap despite using Samsung Display's most advanced QD-OLED panel. Yet, for those of you prioritizing processing finesse and image accuracy, these trade-offs may be acceptable given Sony's strengths in upscaling, motion performance, low bitrate content handling, and color reproduction that closely aligns with the company's own reference-grade mastering monitors. If you're undecided about which OLED TV to buy, one place where you can get good advice is at Richer Sounds, a trusted British AV retailer with more than 50 stores in the UK, who provides 6 years warranty on the vast majority of TVs if you join the company's VIP club. You will get the best deals through cheaper VIP exclusive install-only prices, complimentary gifts or freebies, so go visit your local Richer Sounds store or call telesales for your next TV purchase. Thanks again for your support. Okay, if you are considering the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II, you might also be looking at the Panasonic Z95B, another OLED that focuses heavily on faithful reproduction of creative intent. To help you make up your mind, I've done a side-by-side comparison video you can watch by clicking here.